We wrap up our church year today in anticipation of the start of a new church year next Sunday with the first Sunday in Advent. After a year of working our way through the telling of the coming of Jesus and the stories about his life and ministry, his death, his resurrection, we end up this cycle, so to speak, in what seems to be an interesting place. Not with the story of Jesus' resurrection, not with his ascension, not with the Spirit being given to the disciples, or even the first day of Pentecost from the book of Acts, but with a return to a glimpse of the cross on Good Friday, a moment in which Jesus hangs between two criminals, which seems more like an indication of ending in a final sense than what we expect out of Christ the King Sunday, which is really setting us up for the beginning, that everything that we have been shown this year opens the way for us to continue on our own. Because if we put ourselves back in Holy Week for a minute, I know it's not anywhere near Holy Week, but go back into the mindset for a moment and what we know must have been on the minds of those who gathered around these three men who were being crucified. There wasn't much hope on that hillside. There wasn't anybody really present who was looking forward to much from any of the three, let alone Jesus. All they could see there was the ending of life as it poured out, as they breathed their last. We know that this was a political execution that was designed to show the power of Rome and by extension the power of the emperor, the greatest power on earth. And although the temple leadership had something to do with Jesus' betrayal and his trial and getting the sentence of death for him, Rome was the one on display. And for the people who knew Jesus, or at least knew of him, what they would have seen is that even a man who claimed to be God's son could not stand up to the power of the emperor, the greatest power on earth. And so there wasn't much to hold on to with hopefulness at the cross, except from a very unexpected place. There was a scarcity of looking ahead at anything that God could be doing that was wonderful, a scarcity of anything other than the end of these lives, except for one of the men whose own life was ebbing away as he was breathing his last in his final hours. He was the one who somehow saw the abundance of God pouring forth from the man next to him on the cross. He could see the irony of the Romans' attempt to taunt Jesus by putting a sign on the cross that said, King of the Jews. But he saw through it that there was something to this man and a kingdom beyond this world. He understood the abundance of God's mercy when he heard the man next to him forgive the people who had done this to him. As we take the gospel stories of the crucifixion as a whole, he heard the abundance of love from the man next to him as he was caring for his friends and his mother from that cross and that place of torment. He's the only one who saw that abundance for what it was. And he asked that king to remember him when he came into his kingdom, which of course Jesus granted, as Jesus would surely have done for any and all who would ask for the same thing. We have in this last Sunday of the year a really good starting place to take it from here. The starting place of that recognition for a moment in the midst of trial and tribulation, of suffering and pain, in the midst of what seems like things that are dying, instead, the abundance of God in all of its forms on display. The other thing that always happens on the last Sunday of the year, it always falls that we're just also getting ready to prepare for Thanksgiving. A feast day in the church that is not a church holiday by design, but the church absorbed into its calendar with propers and prayers, because the day of Thanksgiving fits perfectly with the call of Christians to recognize God's abundance and to give thanks for all the things that God pours out for us as well. And it'd be nice to think that all of us greet every day with the kind of thanksgiving for what God does that we seem to muster on Thanksgiving Day, but that's why we have a day to do it. To call us to that as we gather around tables with friends and family, where the manifestation of our thanksgiving is most often noticeable in the abundance of the food that is laid out for us, whether we're eating at our homes or we're guests somewhere else or we're at a restaurant. That abundance of food is the theme of the day. We often make a quick leap to Thanksgiving for the abundance of love with the people that we share those meals with, and sometimes Thanksgiving for the folks who can no longer gather with us, but used to share our tables. And sometimes the conversation will go to Thanksgiving for the fact that we have a place to gather, a place to go, and it does do what Thanksgiving Day is designed to do. It makes us grateful. It fills us with joy for the abundance of God's blessings in so many ways. And the question might become, though, when we have that sense of joy and gratefulness and thanksgiving, what do we do with it? What happens at the end of the day as we loosen our belts a little bit to help digestion? Are we just self-assured that God must love us tremendously and how proud we are of ourselves to be so richly blessed? Or does it begin to turn a corner into blessing others? 10 or 15 years ago, there was a nonprofit in London that helped homeless persons. And one year, they changed up how they were raising funds in the season. Often they would work with some of their clients who received benefits, who got services from them or ate with them or stayed in their shelters. And they would have them in the tube stations throughout the city of London collecting donations for their work. But one year, they swapped it out, and they had some of their volunteers and donors do that instead. People who looked a lot like those of you sitting in these pews today. I would say me, except they didn't dress like me. They dressed like y'all. And they still went into the tube stations around London with cardboard signs, but the signs read differently. We've seen those signs normally, what they say, things like, out of work, please help, or mom with kids, anything you can give is a blessing, or homeless veteran, whatever you have is helpful. Those are the signs we're used to seeing. The signs these people held up, still on cardboard, still with Sharpie, said, I have a home to go to tonight and a warm bed, but I'm collecting for someone who doesn't. Another sign said, I have plenty to eat, more than I need. I'm collecting for someone who doesn't. And on a rainy day, one of the signs said, I have clean, dry clothes I can change into. I'm collecting for someone who doesn't. And what they saw from that, which surprised everybody, was that donations went up dramatically. Which makes us ask a question about human nature, but also about the spirituality of this, which is why it fits into what we're talking about. What is it that would help us to be more generous to people raising funds on behalf of people that need help than just giving funds to the people who need the help when they ask? And I know what human nature is like. I know what I feel like some days when somebody stops me on the street and asks me for something. You know, we reach for the wallet not to open it up, but just to make sure it's safe, right? There can be those days where you're like, you know what, I have mine, and why do you want what I have? What is it my business to give you anything? And I think we know kind of what that feels like at times. The difference here, though, was I think what happened is people identified with the person asking them for money, and it started from a place of shared abundance. I have a house too. Let me help somebody who doesn't. I have more than enough food, but I can help somebody who doesn't. I have clothes to change into. I can help somebody who doesn't. Somehow they figured out, by helping us start from the place of our own abundance, it's a lot easier to be generous and share that abundance with others. And so that's what happened as they went through that campaign. Now, there's something else that always happens this weekend that fits into the same pattern with the end of the church year and getting ready for Thanksgiving. It is not the RSM, although that is going on at the moment. Some of you will probably be there after church today. It is that this is always the Sunday for us when we end the annual campaign for the next year. Most churches do their annual fundraising for the next year's budget in the fall as you're working on budgets and people are thinking about what they're going to do, and we're no different. This year we've had a joyful theme. Literally, the joy in our hearts has been our theme that we kicked off last month. And we've gone through this campaign remembering that truth that we are reminded that we knew from the time we were little children. We sang a song together the first Sunday that we launched the campaign. I've got the joy, 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 joy down in my heart. Guess what? You get to sing it again today. If you haven't seen it yet, spoiler alert, it's your closing hymn. But it tells the truth of what we know to be true in our hearts and have for our whole lives, even though we forget along the way, day in, day out, just like we forget to give thanks day in, day out. But that joy in our heart is tied to that moment from the gospel today. That's kind of where it starts. The ability to see through the challenges and the death of this world and the scarcity that surrounds us every day, and instead see the abundance of a loving and merciful God. The suffering of Jesus, the opening up of the way of life for us, that's the joy that lives deep in our hearts and motivates everything else, including how it is that we go on to help others, to take the teaching of Jesus' life and put it alongside the salvation that came with his death and resurrection. It's both and. Every tradition needs to hold on to both the things of this world and the next. The promise of a life in the next world, but the very serious invitation to heal and fix the one we inhabit right now. As we combine these three, we recognize we are filled with the abundance of God's blessing every day of our lives. We just are. And remembering that is what continues to feed the joy that lives within us. Giving thanks that we are among those who have plenty and then some. Now, some of you have been around long enough to remember the Reverend Lee Hall, who was associate rector here many years ago when I first arrived. And she taught us a song that some of you will also remember about what happens when there are people who have plenty and then some. They help someone else have plenty and then some too. And that's really the spirit of God's abundance, whether we look at it pouring out on the cross, whether we look at it pouring out on Thanksgiving Day, whether we look at pouring out of our joy-filled hearts, it's all the same mechanism of recognizing the abundance of God's love and mercy for us and for others, and our invitation to be a part of extending that abundant love and mercy to others as well. So that those of us who have plenty and then some can make sure others have plenty and then some